All right. So I think last time we left off after the sixth of the 13 midos. So picking up at the seventh one, Hamida Hashvis. So this is Mikla Shehu Tzarich Lefrat, Mifrat Shehu Tzarich Lechlal. Either it's something that's general that we need to specify more, or something that's very specific that needs to be broadened out a little bit. So the first example is Kamosha Namar, Bekod Kol Bechor B'Zachar, where it says, this is in Bamidbar, where we are counting up all the Bechorim and we are comparing them to the numbers of Levim. And it says Bekod Kol Bechor Zachar. So it talks about the male Bechor. And this is from those from Bnei Yisrael. We're not talking about animals here. These are people. It says V'im Amar Bekod Kol Bechor. If it had only said Bechor, V'lo Amar Zachar, and didn't say we're talking about males. Hayisi Omer Kol Peter Rechem Afilu Nekevos. Then I would have thought anybody, right, including females. Akach Amar Zachar, and therefore it has to say males, specifically Zachar. Shemashma Zachar V'lo Nekeva. Zehu Klal Shehu Tzurich Lefrat. So there we have the example of a klal that requires the prat in order to narrow down what it is that we're talking about. That we're only counting up the male firstborns. V'im Amar Zachar V'lo Amar Bechor. What if it only said Zachar and didn't say, it said Bekod Kol Zachar, didn't say Bechor? Then Hayisi Omer Kol Zachar Ben Bechorim Ben Shein Bechorim. Then I would have thought, all males, whether you're the firstborn or if you're not the firstborn. And therefore we need to say both Bechor and Zachar so that we can get the exact, demographic that we're looking for.
You already did that earlier in that Parsha. They counted all the Zachars.
Yeah, okay, that's right. Probably a separate discussion as to understanding that what that Indian was for sure.
Okay, so this is just one. This is not two of the midos.
This is just one. So this is one saying it's either right. So he's counting it as one. So it can go either way. He's counting as one. So this is Rabbi Yishmael is counting this as, or at least his understanding is that it's counting as one. Okay, so then moving on to the eighth midah, Hamida Shminis, v'chodavar shahaya b'chlal, v'yatsa mina klal lamed lo lamed al atzmo yatsa ela lamed al haklal kulo yatsa. So that's saying a lot, but it's basically saying that there's an example in our klal that is teaching us something new that we didn't know before, but it's not teaching it for that one specific example. It's actually teaching it for the entire klal. Okay, so what's an example here? So Kamosha Namar b'molech. So when we're talking about the specific type of avodah zarah called molech, it says ish mi beis Yisrael min ha'ger hagar b'Yisrael asher yitain l'mezara l'molech mosu mas. So anybody who gives over to molech, right, or your child over to molech, will be put to death. U'molech b'chlal shar ha'tiyuvin. This is there are many examples in Chumash where it talks about that something as being a toeva. So this is one example of that. So this is just one example from this klal called tiuvin. So haya lama pirish ansho yoser mikulam. So why is it talking about only by this specific example what the onish is that you're put to death? So lo lamed al atzmo yatsa shalhu beskila ela lamed al haklal kulo yatsa shashar hakol tiyuvim heim beskila. So this is coming to teach us that any one of those that are considered to be a toeva, the punishment will be skila. So yeah, are we good on that?
Go back to read the midah itself again.
Yeah, so this is kol davar shahaya bichlal. So this is anything that is within a klal, within a broad category. V'yatsa mina klal, and then it's called out specifically without, it's not, the entire klal isn't being called out. One specific example is being called out, lamed, to teach us something new. Lola lamed al atzmo, but it's not being called to teach us out something in this example about molech. Rather, or Atzma Yatza, Ella Lamed al Haklal Kulo yatsa. Rather, it's teaching us something about the entire klal. That's what's being called out to do, and not just for the example. So that's how it reads. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so now the number 9. Amidat cheese v'kol davar shahaya bichlal v'yatsa liton ta'un acher shehu che'enyano yatsa lahakel v'lo lahachmir. So this is similar in that we're calling out one example from a broad category. And it's going to be, but this time it's not going to be for the entire klal. It's going to be for its own purpose, but it's only to teach us a kula and not to teach us a chumrah by that specific example. So let's get into the example. So Kamosha Amar v'asher yavo esrayehu bir lachtov eitzim makabeshogig. Okay, so this is biyar. So asher yavo esrayehu biyar lachtov eitzim. Right. So this is the famous example of you're going out, you're chopping down wood, you weren't careful, and the head of the axe is not well attached to the handle. You go to make a big swing, the head of the axe, falls off and flies off and hits somebody and kills them. Okay, so this is clearly an example of, so this is maka b'shogeg, that you're killing somebody accidentally, but bechla rotzeach haya, right? So this is just an example of ritzicha, of killing somebody. Shinamar, and we already know this. Shinamar umake adam yumas, and if somebody kills another person, right, the death, it's the death, you get the death penalty. So and from that pasuk of umake adam yumas, that seems to be indicating bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid. So the klal seems to be if you kill somebody, you are also put to death again, whether you are b'shogeg, whether you're b'mezid. So v'yatsa maka b'shogeg mina klal. So this extra pasuk of the chotev eitzim is coming to teach us that there is there's an exception to this, that the maka b'shogeg exits the klal liton toan acher shehu che'inyano shel maka b'mezid. So this is coming to teach us something from that is different from a maka b'mezid, shezeh himis v'zeh himis v'zeh v'yatsa mina klal. So because if we, I'm trying to translate this well. So because from the klal of maka adam yumas, that seems to be indicating to us whether you're mezid, whether you're shogeg, you would be killed, right? Zeh himis v'zeh himis. Either way, you would be killed. So this new pasuk teaches us no. V'yatsa min haklal lahakel. So it's teaching us a kula by somebody who's shogeg. So it's coming to teach us that special mitzvah or that special din by the maka b'shogeg, that you can flee to the Ari Miklat and survive there and not be put to death, and that's going to be this kula. But it's not teaching me a chumrah; it's only teaching me a kula. So it's interesting. Now that we sort of put this into context, it gives us a bit of an understanding as to why this whole thing about the chotev, eitzim is even mentioned in Sefer Dvarim, because it's actually coming to teach us something that we didn't know before. So it's not just sort of a stam story or something like that. Okay. So the Amidah series, the 10th one. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit different in that here we're going to have a klal, then we're going to have an example that doesn't quite fit the klal, and it's going to teach us something that's both a kula and a chumrah. So that's a little bit different from the last one. Okay, so what's the example? So Kamosha Ne'amar, Ki tikne eved ivri, sheish shamim yavod. So the pasuk tells us that if you purchase an eved ivri, or this is a Jewish slave that's destitute, or whatever the circumstances are, that person owes you money, whatever it is. So they come to work for you for 6 years. Okay, bahotzi ama ha'ivriya min haklal. But if it's a female slave, she's going to have a little bit of a different dinim than a male slave. Shnamar. Because there's another pasuk that tells us that when a man sells his daughter into that slavery as an amma, she doesn't go out like other avadim. So clearly we see that there's something else going on. Like her dinim are different from the male slave, the dinim of a male slave. But yet on the other hand, in Amma, so a female should be simply part of the same klal of an Eved Ivri. Because the pasuk says, "Ki yimkor lecha achicha ha'ivriya," right? And the pasuk says specifically whether you're selling the male or female. So they seem to have at least something in common and part of the same klal, but something must be different by the female. So v'lama yatzis mina klal liton ta'on acher shlo inyano she'avad she'evet eno yotze b'simanim. So now we're going to get into what exactly is different by the female that's not true by a male slave. So shlo so she'evet eno yotze b'simanim. So a male slave is not going to go free when he goes through puberty, but the female slave, I believe, does. And he also doesn't go free if the master dies. So she has a couple of she goes out of slavery a little bit differently when she goes to puberty or if the master dies. I feel a bit so even when this is happening right within those 6 years. Right? So you only have them for 6 years, but even if it's within the 6 years, she would still go free early. So that's clearly the kula here, that that she's going to go out free before a male would. But there's also a chumrah. But there's also a chumrah by her that if the adon chooses to mekadesh her as a wife, then he can do so, and she doesn't have a choice in the matter, which is very different from general of kedushin where she would have a choice in the matter. So there's a chumrah by her as well that she can be mekadesh by the adon.
And he's doing kedushin to marry her himself.
I'm sorry, what was that?
He's marrying her himself.
Yeah, the master can do that. He's allowed to marry her. Now he has to treat her like any other wife. Right? She's no longer a slave at that point, but he has the ability to say, "I want to marry her," and she becomes his wife through kedushin.
And she's obviously doesn't have simanim. She's less than 12.
Right, and exactly, because when she is simanim, she would be going out free.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so that was a little bit different in that, again, we have a kula and a chumrah in that case that we're learning out by her specific example. Okay, so now we go on to the 11th midah. So just 3 more left. It says, V'chol davar shahaya b'chlav yatzel lidon b'davar chadash yet hayachol lahachziro lechlalo ad shechzirna kasev lechlalo b'ferish. Okay, so now again, we have an example of a whole klal, and we're learning something new about one example. So you can't just go back now when the situation changes back, it doesn't simply go back to the klal until there's another pasuk that tells us that we can. So let's look at this. I think it'll make more sense. Okay, so Kamosha Namar, V'kohen ki yikne nefesh kinin kasbahu. So yochel v'yolid beso hem yochlu balachmo. So here, where a kohen is purchasing a slave, and this is, I believe, an Eved Kanani, right? So this is somebody who's has a mixed status of being a non-Jew and Jew. So it says, the pasuk says that this Eved can eat the truma just like a kohen's children do. Okay, ubitu bechlal yalid beso, but it also tells that his right, yalid beso is his children, and the bita, the daughter, is also included in the yalid beso. Okay, haisa ben pnuya ben nesua, and this is going to be regardless of whether she is, according to this pasuk, it sounds like whether she is married or whether she is still single. But now we're going to learn something new about her. But once she gets married, she can no longer eat truma from her. Now, this is assuming that she is marrying a zar, right? She's not marrying a kohen. Shenamar ubas kohen ki tihya leish zar he betrumas akachim lotochal. So once she marries a non-Kohen, right, then she no longer is able to eat the trumas kachim from her father's house. Okay. V'hoil v'hotzia hakasav min haklal ieta yachol achzir lechlalo afilu hi alman ugrusha. Now, what happens if she goes back to becoming a pnuya? Because either she becomes a widow or she becomes a grusha, she divorces. So would she be going back into her house and now eating from the truma again or not? So according to this midah, until we have another pasuk that tells us that she can go back to her old status, we can't infer that on our own.
Right. Can't have kids.
What's that?
If she doesn't have kids, she can go back.
So that's going to be the right. You've hit on the next pasuk. We're right, but until we knew that, until we had that pasuk, we didn't know that, so we couldn't just assume that.
Yeah, what's the next pasuk in Emor?
Right. All right. So let's look at that. So I feel he almano grusha im lo yachzirena hakasuv lechlala, without another pasuk to return her into that status of the klal. Beferush, we wouldn't be able to do it, but now we know Shnamar Ubasko and Kitiya Almano Grusha Vizera Einla, as you said, she doesn't have children. Shava Base Aviha Binoreha Melechem Aviha Tochal. So right, as long as she doesn't have children, then she can go back into that status of being part of the klal again. But again, we needed that new pasuk to teach us that she can go back. We can't assume on her own that she simply goes back into a klal when she's left the klal.
Right.
Okay. All right. So now we're up to the 12th midah. So this is v'davar halamed mi'inyano v'davar halamed misofo. So something that we learn from itself and from the end. So let's look at what that is. K'mashenamar be'inyan Shabbos. Shabo ish tachtav al yetze ish mimkomo biyom hashvi. So when it's talking about Shabbos, and I think this is in this week's parsha, isn't it? When we talk about or certainly in one of the upcoming parshios, that we say a person al yetze ish mimkomo biyom hashvi, and this is talking about tchum Shabbos, that you have to stay in your place, meaning you can't go outside of the tchum. Right? It doesn't mean you can't physically leave your house, though. So it's not, the idea is not, we're not, the pasuk isn't teaching us that we have to stay at home and not move the entire day of Shabbos. Rather, you can't go 2,000 amos. And we learned this from the Indian. How do we know this? We know this from the Indian that the pasuk is talking about Shabbos. And so that was our first example, is that we're learning something, but we learn it from the Indian itself, or we're learning it from the Sof. So we'll see another example as well, but we can see that from the pasuk itself, we have to sort of understand it from the context. Okay. So by the Kohen Gadol, when it says, and I think this is when we're talking about going to like a funeral, right? That he cannot leave the mikdash. Doesn't mean you can never leave the mikdash or leave that status of being sanctified. But this is only talking about becoming a tumas meis. And again, we're learning it from the Indian that the context of where this pasuk resides is talking about tumas meis and what happens when you have meis mitzvah and all that sort of thing. But davar halami misofo. So now we're going to look at. So those two examples were examples of where we learn out the gedarim, the Indian of what we're talking about from the context itself. Now, what does it mean? But davar halami misofo. So that is commercial namar gabe arayas ish el kol she'er besaro lo tikruvu legalos erva. So asra lanu kol sharsha be'olam ach besofa inin. So it sounds like when we say ish el kol shar besaro lo tikruvu legalos erva, sounds like it's asra lanu kol shar be'olam. That sounds like it's a very broad category that would be asr to us. Ach besofa inin pirish lanu es ha'asuros. But then it starts to actually enumerate those as part of the parsha that's going on. So Shneimar Ervas Ploni Vuploni Lo Segala, right? There's a whole bunch of examples of this erva, of this type of erva. This you cannot, you can't be part of. You can't have an intimate relationship with. You can't have a marriage, that sort of thing. Mayhem Nuko Lameda Mutaros. And from there you can also see what is mutter. So you've seen both what's usr and what's usr. Usr from it. And again, this is from the Sof because it starts by saying, very broadly speaking, that you cannot have any kind of intimate relationship with these. But then with what sounds like it's a very broad category, but then we start to narrow that category down with all these subsequent psukim. So that's learning something from the Sof. So it's the Sof of the Indian, not the Sof of the pasuk itself. Okay. Ukmar Behaforas Nidareha Shahaav Mefer Nidre Bito Vabal Nidre Ishto. So when we learn about the Nidarim of a woman, that the father and the husband are able to nullify her vows, her Nidarim. Shemashram ben Devarim sheyesh ben inui nefesh uben she'ein bahem inui nefesh. And when we look at, again, just the psukim, at least at the beginning, they seem to indicate that the father in her, when she's in her father's house, or the Baal when she's married, have the ability to be mefer, to nullify any vow that she takes upon herself. But ach b'sofa inin pirish kol neder v'kol shavus Israel anos nefesh lamad. They were only really learning that if it's something it's like inui nefesh. That's the example he's giving. I think it's actually also if it's something that's regarding, like if it's something that affects her husband, I think that's also another category of what he can be mayfair. He can nullify. But if she says, I'm not going to eat this type of food, or I'm going to take a fast, going to do a fast or something like that, or something else that involves him, that he has the ability for the husband. Or the father, they have the ability to nullify those nidarim, but something that doesn't really affect them, or doesn't affect inui nefesh, that they aren't able to nullify. So again, that's where we learn it from the Sof, is at the end of it specifically, psukim specifically say that we're talking about inui nefesh and those types of examples. Okay, so that is Midah 12. And that takes us to the last one, the Midah Shloshes, the 13th. And this one is Shnei Ksuvim Hamachishim Ze et Ze Ad Sheyevu HaKosuv HaShlishi V'Yachriya B'neihem. Right, so we have two psukim that appear to contradict each other, and then we need a third pasuk to come in and help us understand what's really going on, right? To be machriya. Okay, so here we have an example. K'moshenamar Bereshis Bara Elokim Es HaShemayim V'Asaretz. So Shemashma Shashemayim Nivru Techila. From that first pasuk, it sounds like Hashem created the Shemayim V'Asaretz. The Shemayim came first. It sounds like that's what was created first. However, because of Acher Omer Biyom Azot Hashem Elokim Eretz V'Shemayim. But then it says that when Hashem created the land and the heavens, Shemashma Sha'aretz Nivras Techila. So then it sounds like the land was. So what's going on? There is no problem. There's no contradiction, because I think there's a pasuk in Yeshayahu Af Yidei Yisoda Eretz V'Minu Tivcha Shemayim Koriani Alehem Yamdu Yachad. That the fact that they stood together, or that this happened together, seems to be indicating that Hashem created them at the same time. So it's really not a stira. It's really that creation of Shemayim V'Aretz all happened somehow simultaneously. So that's our third pasuk coming in. Ukama Shenamar Atem Ri'isem Ki Mina Shemayim Dibarti Imochem. The pasuk by Ma'ibet Har Sinai, where it says, where Hashem says, you saw that from the heavens I spoke with you. Shemashma Shelo Diber Imahim Bahar. So it sounds like he wasn't speaking to them on the mountain or on Har Sinai. It was only from Shemayim. However, see the Mishnah Torah, but in Devarim it says, in Sefer Devarim it says, Panim befanim Diber Hashem Imachem Bahar mitoch ha'esh. But then it says that he did speak from the Har. So which one is it? Was it the Shemayim or was it the Har? Shenamar. So it's our third pasuk. Mina shemayim hishmiacha es kolo liyasreka ve'al haaretz harecha es asher hagdula. So we see that it sounds like it was emanating, the voice or whatever it was, the revelation was emanating from both Shemayim and from Aretz. So again, it was happening in two different places at the same time, and therefore there's no contradiction between the earlier two psukim. Okay. Then one final example, K'mo she'namar kol chelev v'chodam lo sochenu. Any chelev, any dam you can't eat. Shemashma bein chelev chaya, bein chelev behema. That sounds like it's any kosher animal, whether it's a chaya or a behema. But then it says ksiv ach kasher yocha es atzvi v'esa ayo kin tochlenu. But then it says specifically by a tzvi and ayo, which would be by a chaya. So it sounds like really it's only a problem of chelev by a chaya and not by a behema. But the first pasuk sounds like it was from both. So which one is it? We don't know until we have the third pasuk of Baha Kosev Shlishi v'Hechriya b'Neim Shnamar Kol Chelev Shor v'Chesev v'Eiz Lo Sochlu. So then we see that specifically that it's going to be by any type of animal that the chelev is going to be usher to eat.
Very good. Perfect. Good. Well, this is the first time he gave more than one example.
Yeah.
The other ones don't have a whole lot more examples.
I wonder that too. Like, are there other examples that he chose not to give, or right for some of the other ones, or are there ones that don't have a lot of? I don't know. It's a good ha'ara. I'm not sure, but you're right. Some of them he gives more examples than others. That's for sure. So we finished this brisa up, which is great. Or maybe I don't think it's a brisa. Maybe it's a medrash, isn't it? Isn't this come from
brisa? The Rabbi Yishmael, right?
Yeah. Right, brisa. But I thought it came from. I don't know. Maybe it is possible that it appears in different places. But I thought from the Mishnah Brura that it says that it comes from a. That's what I was thinking of. That it comes from a medrash, because we say this right as part of the introduction to davening, right before Pesukei Zimra, and this is all part of being Mekayim Berachas Torah. So we start with Parshas, Korban Tamid. So we have something from Torah, Torah Shabbat. Then we do Ezehu Makoman. So we have Mishnayos, and then we have this, and I think. The Mishnah Berurah explains that even though this comes from a medrash, but it is in place of a Gemara, something like that is what I think the Mishnah Berurah says. But again, maybe it might appear in different places as well, like many, Ma'amar Chazal. We'll stop here for the day, and I think next week we will get into a new topic altogether.